Hi, I'm Ambeth Ocampo. Today I'm going to show you my shelf. Because what you see behind me, which most people think is a Zoom background, is actually my shelves. And when I'm working, I have to be literally arm's length away from the material. Many of my rare books are now in the Kyoto University Center for Southeast Asian Studies. There are about 10,000 volumes in Holy Angel University in Angeles. There are books in my cubicle in the Ateneo, but the things that are most important to me are here in my home. Yeah, parang ito yung Philippine Revolution shelf. So it's all Revolution, lahat Aguinaldo nandyan. And then my dictionaries are here. The oldest Tagalog dictionary is this one, 1613, Pila. There are only 2 copies in the universe. Tagal ko na ito nabili. Wala na ngayong ganito. This is the Yale facsimile of Picafetta. This is a whole Magellan shelf. That's why I was so prepared for 2021. Kasi nandyan na lahat. Oh. How many editions of Picafetta? Ang lagi kong pinupuntahan ito. And then you realize when you have a library, you go always to one shelf. So Solidaridad is there. This is Blair and Robertson. This is my pet, Freud. So documentary sources. And this is the 25 volumes of Rizal's writing. So all of his writing is here. Letters, diaries, etc. This is the facsimile of the Noli. So you see the handwritten version, what it looks like. You have a handwritten version of the Philly. Mura-mura lang to, tag 50 pesos lang ito noon. Walang bumibili. Because they don't read Spanish. But ako naman, just looking at it is amazing. They also reproduced results mula sa high school notebook niya. His notebook of various questions written by, and then you can see J.R. Mercado. Both names. Yan, no? So iba-iba nandyan. Pati mga resibo, may mga drawing. Dito lang, I can write forever on Jose Rizal. We are in the space where I keep all the autographed copies and my rare Filipiniana, which rare is defined as anything published before 1950. Okay, so these are all the books that I have written, all 35 of them. And then these are books where I contributed either an essay or I wrote an intro. So this was the silver pen that Rizal supposed to have won for Juventud Filipina. And then this one naman was a pen I bought from a dealer who was going to melt all the silver. So parang wala pang 200 pesos yan. Kasi it was all black. And then when I cleaned it, lumabas dun sa ribbon, Premio for Poetry, and then it says Emilio Jacinto. This one is Julian Felipe's Cedula. So I saw it in an antique shop. I like collecting national artists' things. So brushes of Arturo Luz, a brush of Manansala. The pen of Frankie Jose, the pen of Virgilio Almario. Then I went to Cebu. I asked for a pencil from Resil Mojares' desk. Those are Gregorio Saides cufflinks. It's a postcard sent by Fabian de la Rosa, the uncle of Amor Solo. Diba? We often think it's a newspaper na malaki. Diba? So it's smaller than A4. And then this is a copy of the Malolos Constitution, diba? Printed in 1899. And this one, it's an obsidian mirror. It was made by a Filipino sculptor in Mexico, Olbes, Dading Olbes. Olbes calls this Dr. Ambeth's mirrors. When I want to rest my eyes, I gaze into it. So yun, these are on the table. Abe Cruz also had a cluttered table because he says you should always litter your table with things that not distract, they inspire writing. So, pag wala kang iniisip, biglang diba? Well, a library is also a personal space. And very few people actually come in. While I publish a lot about history, my sisters were saying that the people who are following you also want to know a little bit about you, how you do your work. So I'd like to share my shelf, not only so that you will get to know me, but hopefully to inspire you to also have your own libraries. You are looking at least 50 years of accumulation. So the journey of 1,000 miles starts with the first book. And in 2000, they had a special exhibition of Thomas Jefferson's books. And he had a peculiar or a very personalized filing system. So what the library did was they arranged Jefferson's books in the way that he arranged it in his home in Monticello. And as I was walking inside, one of the librarians said something I will never forget. She said, "You are walking inside Jefferson's mind." Libraries are very personal things, the way in which they are arranged. You can tell a person by the books that they are reading. I'd like to think that I became a reader because I grew up in a house with books. My father was a reader. Reading was something that he developed early in life and one of the treasures that he gave me. As a boy, I remember that if I asked for a toy was a choice. Father could say no, but he would never say no to a book. In a sense, I guess that was his way of making me a reader. When I started as a historian, many of my mentors like Teodoro Agoncillo and Emilio Aguilar Cruz used to say that you have to buy books because that is actually your weapon as both as a writer and as a historian. So we really had to buy the books because at the time, wala pang internet. Many things I can find online, but many books are still not online, and that is why it's important to have your own set. I remember one of my biggest acquisitions was the Blair and Robertson. It's 55 volumes of historical documents on the Philippines. And I remember Abe Cruz was telling me, "Ba't ka bibili niyan? Any decent library will have the books, so you don't really need them." And I replied, paano kung 2:00 ng umaga kailangan ko? Mag-aantay pa ba ako next day para bilhin? And parang away kami niyan na wag daw ako bumili. So without telling him, I bought a set. The pleasure is not just in the reading. The pleasure is also visual. You can smell it. You can hear pages. So it's a multi-sensory experience. So the books are there for reference, for work, but they're also there for pleasure. I love everything equally. And I have thought about that a long time. I don't really have an answer. There are many valuable books. It was one of the times, I think it was one of the coup attempts when we were forced to leave our home in Makati. And my father came in and said, "You can each take one bag." And I remember sitting in my library asking myself that question, what will I bring? And I couldn't decide. So my sister came in and she was the one to choose. She says, this item of Rizal's you have to bring, this book you have to bring. And I guess at that point, you just realize that life is more important. So I just said, I'll just leave everything and, bahala na kung anong gawin. So a physical book may be gone, but it is up here, it is in your heart. So in that way, you bring a library with yourself. It's the Noli. When you think about Ibarra, he comes in with all the great intentions and then he's foiled at every step. That shows you that life is unfair. The book that made me cry was actually not a work of literature. It was actually a book on the trial of Andres Bonifacio. I first read it when I was an undergrad student in the Rizal Library of the Ateneo. There was a part in the trial where you actually see Andres Bonifacio talking to the court saying, "Please help my wife because there's somebody who wants to take advantage of her." And then they called Mrs. Bonifacio in to testify. And when she came in, she says, "My husband was stabbed and shot and he's still wearing the same clothes that he was wearing when he was arrested." And she says he hasn't received medical care. His wounds are festering. And she says, "I brought a blanket. Will the court allow me to cover him?" And the court allows it. No? So she covers him with the blanket. This is in the trial. And as I was reading that, I realized that my tears were on the book already, because then it made the story of Andres Bonifacio more real to me. I mean, this was him at his lowest point, his wife coming to bring him a blanket. And I didn't cry very noisily, but it's probably the only thing that book I've read that made tears fall. It's the Noli and also the Fili. Life is not fair. Early in my life, you go through difficulties, and it's difficulties with other people. I mean, Jean-Paul Sartre says, hell is other people. So I resonate with the Rizal or the Ibarra who goes through a bad turn. And I also resonate with Simone, who wants revenge. Because, I mean, this may not be the Christian way to think about it, but, you know, I won't just sit by and just be quiet. It's very nice to get even. And most people think that I would invite Rizal. Contrary to popular belief, I don't think I'd invite him, simply because I know him, I think, better than he knows himself. I've read everything he has written, including his laundry receipts. No? But who's the person I would most like to invite? It would be Apolinario Mabini. People find this very odd, but I want to know what it was like to be the most powerful person next to Aguinaldo, and then to fall from power, no, so quickly because of his principles. So the Luna brothers are people that I also like. No, Antonio Luna, who was assassinated, Juan Luna, who they say was poisoned, because they're very interesting historical characters, very human. They got angry. Juan Luna shot and killed his mother-in-law, which I think many husbands want to do, but cannot do. No, but the thing there is, I'd like to fill my dinner table with people who, on the strength of their personalities, changed Philippine history for good or for worse. And being able to talk to them would be able to help me clear up, the way in which they formed and shaped Philippine history, and would partly explain why we are the way that we are. People always ask me to recommend a Philippine history book. And they often think in terms of textbook. So there's no good textbook until I write mine. But what is the best history book? The best Philippine history for me is the 10-volume Filipino Heritage, because it's a delight to read and it's very visual. The second is also the 10 volumes called Kasaysayan, the History of the Filipino People, which again was the best history that could be bought by 1998, and it's also well presented. But to read a 1-volume history, it would probably be Philippine State and Society by Patricio Abinales and Donna Amoroso, which distills all the known academic sources into 1 volume. So it teaches us why the state and how the state came about. History, unfortunately, you can only bring the multi-volumes. You cannot bring them to bed with you, but that's the best that I can do. Of course, Rizal's novels come to mind, mainly because they are not read for pleasure. They have to be read for pleasure, to be enjoyed, and not to make us into patriotic Filipinos. So that makes 3. 4 would be Nick Joaquin. He has many books which are worth reading, but the 2 books of Nick Joaquin recently is his book called Culture and History, and the second one is Question of Heroes, because then this gives you a very iconoclastic view of what we all learned in school. So if it helps you rethink what we think we know, then it has served its purpose. The last one would be, I'm not really a great fan of lit, but one is the collection of poetry by Jose Garcia Villa, because he actually makes you think. I mean, there's wonderful, and it's not just text, it's the way in which the letters on a page form. No? Then there's one called The Emperor's New Clothes, and then it's blank. So it's wonderful. So that's the English version. There is a little-known Tagalog writer called Alejandro G. Abadilla, who wrote poetry in Filipino just as wonderful and as complicated as Villas. So these are the two sides of the same coin. My oldest book is unfortunately in Kyoto University now. It was 17th century book, History of the Philippines. No? But my oldest book in this library is 1788. It is volume 2 of the monumental Historia General de Filipinas. It is significant not only because it is old, but because it is printed in Manila by Filipino printers. So it is a marvel of early Filipino bookmaking and book printing. My most recent purchase was a book on the Philippines by Philip Bowring. He's a journalist based in Hong Kong. It is a foreigner's, an outsider's view of what the current Philippines is like and why it is the way that it is. It's about the mapping of the Philippines, the Spanish. Then I want to read some fiction, so I got this. Magandang reviews naman. I want Miguel Sijuco. This one's about headhunting, kababalik. Yan ito mga tula ni Vim Nadera. Then when I went to Cebu, Resil Mojares gave me this. So these are the books I'm going to read pa. One of my mentors, Emilio Aguilar Cruz, used to say that the sources of writing are reading, travel, and conversation. He says, if you have all three of these, you will never run out of things to write about. The mind is like a well, and we draw from this well, whatever it is, writing, speaking, whatever, and the well dries up. And one of the ways to replenish it is by reading. While I cannot read as much, and now I'm teaching college freshmen, many of them who don't like to read, and I keep telling them, university students should develop a love for reading. Once you develop that, you should read as much as you can. When I hear people who say that history is boring, my standard answer is, you had a bad teacher or you did not have me. History cannot be boring because history is about life. History is about human nature. Well, if you just look at the word, history it's a story, it's storytelling. So if you cannot tell a story with a beginning, middle, and an end, if you cannot tell a story that will engage the person you are talking to, then it doesn't come across. So I'd like to think that the history that I'm writing is that. It is a history that took from the academic tower and gave it back to people where it also belongs. Now that I have shown you my shelf, I hope you will not be overwhelmed by seeing so many books. But I hope that by looking at my shelves, you will be encouraged to build your own personal library, reading the books that you enjoy, the books that you need for work. This forms a part of you, part of the memory palace that's in your head, and part of a physical library that you will hopefully build. So reading is important because it feeds the mind, it feeds the soul, it makes us into what we are. So I hope that you will read as much as you should, read as much as you can, and build your own shelf.